Well, good morning, everybody. Here's the plan for today's forecast video. Yesterday, we spent a lot of time talking about the tropics. I don't really have anything new about the tropics. We're still continuing to see a bit more suppression in the season, and I don't expect it to uptick maybe until we get into the month of September. But what I want to talk about today is frost at the beginning, and then we're going to get into our normal forecast routine, and at the end, I'm going to stretch it out and kind of talk about some of the new longer range models, plus an update on South America. So this is the wind field early this morning, and if you're in the Great Lakes region and all throughout this part of the eastern United States, it was a pretty chilly morning. We had calm winds, clear skies, high pressure, and as a result, temperatures were able to easily bottom out last night. And one of the reasons that those conditions help with that is you get what's called strong radiative cooling. So when there is no intervening layer of cloud or strong winds to mix lower level temperatures up, you just tend to get the Earth radiating its heat back to space relatively unabated and just escapes. And that's why it gets so cool so quickly. But at several of the events I've spoken at this week, I've gotten the same question. The question's about an early frost. And there's, of course, a lot of reason to be worried about the early frost if you planted a crop late, which because of how wet things were in the upper Midwest, we know there has been some significant risk to that. You combine it with the fact that at the end of this week, after watching excessive heat build into the south and southwest, these last couple of days, we've seen several locations approach or set new daily low temperature records. And so it's been a top of mind thing for a lot of growers. So this morning's temperatures, just to kind of give you a good glimpse at this, I was recording about 6:20 this morning. We can see we were down in the 40s and low 50s for a broad area here on the backside of a low that has just left the northeast. And so we had that clearing out of the high pressure and as cool conditions returned. Now we know that heat that's been in Texas is going to be building into the Midwest and into the Great Lakes and into the east very soon as we get into this weekend. But this has just kind of prompted a lot of questions about frost. So let's just talk about this a bit. And if you're in that region, there is a great tool. I'll post it in the kind of notes below the video here so you have this one. It comes from the Midwest Regional Climate Center. And what they've done is they've given you the options of looking at fall freeze dates and maps, spring freeze dates, all sorts of great tools here. Now I've chosen 32 degrees as the threshold. So we're going to literally just go right after the first time we touch that freezing temperature. You can change that. You can also change the statistic if you want, the earliest or the latest, or if you want the 10th percentile and the 90th percentile, you've got it in there. I'm just going to choose average. And what's nice about this is it's a interactive map. Oops, sorry about that. There we go. And what you can do is just hover over any location. So I live in Champaign County. Our average first fall frost date is October 19th. And you just kind of wander around here, like let's go to central Iowa, October 6th. Let's go into, parts of eastern South Dakota. Now we're looking at September 28th. Coming into central Minnesota, it's a little bit later, but sometime around that first week of October. Farther to the north you go, you start to see more of these September dates. And what this just allows us to understand is what we would expect if we just took a big long chunk of time, 1950 to 2023, and looked at the averages. So we're always going to be comparing to that number. And I want to just give you a hint as to what to be on the lookout for should there be major frost risk. All right, so what are we going to be looking for? Okay, so use the tool, play around with it. Goes all the way up into the northeast, stretches down into parts of the mid-south, but it's mainly made for the Midwest, and that's what's shown here. And then play around with the other stuff. This is a fantastic website for you to bookmark and use in the future. Okay, so I made this several weeks ago, and I'm just going to bring it back up here because nothing's changed about this. Given that a lot of this region would have in October first frost, right? I understand it's late September the farther north you go, but a lot of this region would be looking at an October first frost. I wanted to know if El Nino comes in, does that increase or decrease the risk of having a mild or a cold October? And so what we put together here was a correlation map. And we just looked at all of the ENSO events using the multivariate ENSO index for the month of October and correlated with temperature. Now, whenever you see the blue, what this means is this is a negative correlation. So if there's a La Nina, that would mean actually warmer in this area, cooler in the west. And that was the main idea. If you end up having if you end up having the blue color, that's warmer than average temperatures in fall. If La Nina comes in and dominates the pattern. So if we're looking at one big external factor to predict with now for what things may look like a month and a half from now, we're going to look at La Nina. That's just one piece to all of this, and that would be a piece that I think we should consider. So where is La Nina? We're going to actually talk about La Nina again at the end, but we have lately seen some stronger trade winds. I'll show you what's going on with the Southern Oscillation Index, which is rebounding. But this is not, I can't put a lot of, hope and faith that La Nina is going to do normal La Nina things in the fall. I think that's the main story. I've made a case for you for several weeks that it's these ocean temperatures in the North Pacific and North Atlantic that seem to be dominating things. And I'll just say this before we go any farther. We need to watch these ocean temperatures as well. Because what's created such cool water in parts of the Bering Sea and then in the Chukchi Sea, which is here, has been we've seen a lot of deep low pressure in this area at times. And if you really want to know the very simple thing that can be done by all of you, regardless of your level of training in meteorology, is a good indicator of early frost potential will be to watch Alaska. So if Alaska gets really, really hot, that will tell me that the Rossby wave, the big waves we always talk about, is probably building up into a large ridge somewhere in this area. And if we get ridging here, because of the typical length of a Rossby wave, there'll be a trough that'll dip into the Great Lakes states. And that will deliver cold air. It'll, behind it, give us high pressure like we have right now. And that will bring in the risk of that, early morning temperature touching frost. So if you really want to know what to do, watch for Alaska. If in the next 6 weeks, we see the forecast in Alaska getting really, really warm, then we have the risk of frost in these areas. So right now, what is it? This the next 5 days. We're cool along the whole West Coast. So what is that going to do? That's actually because of the same wavelength I'm talking about, the flow of the jet stream. Watch what happens to the heat that's been in Texas. See how it opens up in the mid part of the country? And it just pushes east. So that is just some very basic, dynamical flow application to how we can forecast temperatures. So over the next 5 to 8 days, we're going to watch a lot of warmth move back into this area as Alaska and the West cool off. Now watch this. We're at day 10. Day 10 and beyond, Alaska starts to warm up. The West Coast warms up. Where does the cold go? Right back to here. Now I say cold. Where does the near normal or cooler temperatures go? And are we talking about it getting cold enough on September the 6th for a frost? No. But could this mean we have low temperatures back in the 40s and in the 50s here? Absolutely. So that's just the thinking. And so I think when this is going to become most important is not early September, but late September. And if we can avoid seeing major heat waves move into the Northwest all the way to Alaska, then we will likely see lower and lower risk. And what typically makes that possible is if La Nina comes in and makes that North Pacific jet a bit more variable. And if it keeps it away from just building in massive ridges into Alaska. So that's going to be my thinking. You now have the tools. And don't forget that I also have maps like this. So listen, I know a lot of you use agweather.com, the website I use to build all of this and show you this. There's a pretty good chance that website's going to be taken down for the next few days. And the reason for that is I have to finish rebuilding it. I'm continually exceeding bandwidth, so I bought a new server to make up for that, and I have to transfer everything over, and it's going to take me some time. But the new server, I hope, will be a better experience for all of us. So these maps will surface. They'll be back on there, plus, honestly, hundreds of thousands of more maps. They'll be more easy for you to get to, but they'll all be there very, very soon. Okay. So from this point forward, again, this is our frost risk over the next 7 days. And we've been talking about the cooler weather coming in late this week and over the weekend. That's going to give us the chance for some snow in this area. Very, very high elevation snow. I'm talking like the peaks. So it's not a valley thing. But there's a chilly bit of air coming here as the heat pumps into this area. All right, with all of that, let's now get into where we've been. This is this morning, just as the sun was rising. There's the low that exited. Here's the clear skies behind it. Do note that there is some smoke in the air, though. And yes, that smoke can have a similar effect as cloud cover does. But overall, that's not enough to really keep a warm layer of the atmosphere in place. We see the remnant clouds from the storms yesterday that curled around the big Texas ridge. Here's the front that's parked, that's just sitting down here. It's going to sit down here for several days. But I want to take you back to yesterday to show you some of these storms. because as they popped off all the way from Arizona, where we had locally extremely heavy rain, curling right through the Four Corners, out of Colorado, into parts of Nebraska, South Dakota, into Wyoming, Montana, and then all the way up into parts of, coming out of Alberta, but mainly into Saskatchewan, and now expected to go farther to these. Some of these storms were absolutely enormous, and there was some wildfire behind it. You can see some of these large fires, some here, some in Wyoming too. So I wanted to zoom in and show you these. Now let's go up to the Canadian Prairie. So again, this is Saskatchewan. This is Alberta. Here's Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And yesterday, just watch these storms pop. These were monsters. Look how big. I mean, I'll be honest, this one storm's anvil, covered like 15% of Saskatchewan as a province. That's enormous to see the size of this. And of course, underneath it, it was doing some damage, including some large hail out of that storm. Looking back over the last 3 days, we've had several reports of hail in Montana, and also the hail in South Dakota, some down here in parts of Arkansas, and some of the scattered storms, which remember back on this weekend, we saw a lot of damage down here from storms. Well, we followed up with some hail from these recent storms as well. So from there, let's take a look at the radar this morning. Let's bump this up a little bit. This is just from last night through this morning. We're looking at this for a couple of reasons, just to get an idea on some recent precipitation moving through some key dry areas like into parts of Nebraska and Kansas, but also moving some of that rain through parts of North Dakota toward the Red River of the North. We're using this also to get an idea on the initialization of the new forecast models. But first of all, let's just take a look at our thunderstorm threat today. SPC Day 1 outlook. Several regions under marginal risk. We'll see why in a few moments. This would be Day 2 on the 23rd. Again, we're watching Four Corners states getting up into Wyoming and then here, right along the high and western plains. And Day 3, kind of the same areas. Meaning as this ridge opens up, we're really going to keep a lot of the severe storm threat farther to the, to the west. The upper level flow pattern, that discussion has largely stayed unchanged, which is good. There's the deep low that's off the northwest coast. Here's the ridge by this weekend that opens up into the Midwest. That low continues to eject troughs in this direction. So the flow through the next 4 or 5 days is this, with this ridge opening into this area. But as we talked about, there's going to be this little shortwave that sneaks around and comes into Texas right here that's going to be pushing some moisture into southern Texas. And this has been an area we've been looking at consistently as being very, very dry. It's missed out on a lot of the precipitation, and that's just a continuation of that narrative of we're going to be pushing some moisture into that region out of the Gulf of Mexico. So there it is. That's the low sitting over Texas by midweek next week. We continue to see troughs digging through right along the U.S.-Canada border, which is where we're expecting the wettest conditions to be. But this is going to start to bring in that shot of cooler air at some point toward the end of the month, in the beginning of September, back into the Great Lakes. It's going to be these troughs that sweep through here like this. And the model's been relatively consistent on the development of that. All right, so that's going to be our next time period, late August, early September, of returning a couple of shots at cooler air. Now, I can't tell you that the models have been overly consistent with it, but it's been there in some way, shape, or form in the last several forecasts. So what this all means is I think we got a good initialization on the model this morning. Let's pick it up at 7 a.m. And I'm going to do the first pass through this just quickly because I want you to see the overall flow. You see the storms rolling out of the plains multiple times, some of it getting into the Midwest, but a deep low in the northwest. Look at that low just curling itself off of the Oregon and Washington coast there. Locally, some very heavy rain and some isolated storms out of that. But most of our thunderstorm activity is going to be centered around what's flowing around the larger ridge opening into the Midwest. And we can see that if I just fast forward you to tonight and to early tomorrow morning, where we're going to see some of those storms just popping here based on some of the forecast radar guidance. Getting out there a bit farther, this is all the way into Saturday midday. There could be some scattered rain that moves a bit east, but this is not overly well forecast at this point as to how much can get into this part of the Corn Belt. This is overall a drier stretch from a region from Texas all the way here into the Ohio River Valley. Now that is, of course, until we can get that flow to come around the bottom side of this and get into coastal Texas, which we're going to take a look at in the models next. So next 7 days, where's the activity? It's in the northwest. It's curling through the Great Lakes, through the Four Corners states. And we have a dry stretch in through this area outside of a push of moisture here and possibly some scattered storms that do make it into the Midwest. Most of the biggest storms are going to be up in the Canadian Prairie. That's the WPC forecast. Here's the national blend of models for the next 7 days. Here is the 10-day from the NBM. And now we can get over to the AI. That's the AI 7-day and the AI 10-day. And what's interesting is when you go from 7 to 10 days, we can see that in that last few days there, the model is attempting to take whatever's coming up here and start to pull that moisture back into this corridor, which there are several folks in there that could use another good push of rain before this crop finishes up. But overall, we have a drier forecast for much of the southeast, except for Florida, where the front is parked, and some of that dryness does get into the mid-Atlantic as well. We can also see that same look from the European operational run. That's the 7-day. Here's out to 10 days. So see how that's trying to bring that in as well. But overall, you can see our stormiest corridor here showing up pretty well in the European model. The GFS 6E run looks something like this for the next 7 days, and here's 10 days. So we've kind of walked through the models just superficially. Let's pull it down into some probabilities. I think that's a good way to always distill this down. What I do want you to see here is that over the next 10 days, what has happened is the risk of staying really dry, that's less than 1/10 of an inch, that has backed off in the probability in this area. We still expect it to be drier. There's going to be places here that don't pick up any rain in the next 10 days. But overall, the pattern is starting to just fluctuate a bit, that we're going to get better chances of driving some rain back into this area as the whole trough ridge pattern evolves and moves. That's the good thing. Right now, it is not blocked. It's not stuck. It is open and moving. But you did see drier risks coming back into Montana, certainly down here in the desert southwest. But notice, because of that low that's curling its way up the west coast, if I flip this over to the probability of over 1 inch, and we should have got a new model run in there, we did. So let's just stretch it back out. Sorry, that always happens, but that's just the time of morning I record. This is our chance at getting 1 inch. So it's increased in this area. It's always been high here. It's always been high there, but this is also a pretty good chance of getting some rain. If you're curious about 1/2 inch, let's just step it down 1. This pattern still stays relatively stormy for a lot of people for the next 10 to 15 days. We'll just need to be watching the transition right in through this area. And then as we approach September and get really into the beginning of September, what happens in the tropics will be, I think, the big push toward any sort of a shift in this forecast. As we look out there at week 2, models are in pretty good agreement here, especially the European model and the CPC, with bringing in more wet weather here, with the dryness kind of anchored right around, it's almost centered on Memphis, but it's this whole mid-south region. Although it says dry, I still think that there are some chances of getting some moisture into that area. It's just not going to be enough to offset the heat that's coming in the near term. So in other words, if you look at the precipitation minus evaporation, I think the evaporation is going to win in this area because of the heat and the dryness leading up to when we could get some rainfall in this region. But I do like the week 2 forecast. They still make a lot of sense to me given where I showed you that trough ridge pattern earlier in the forecast video. If we come back to temperatures, here's today's highs. And still, this heat in Texas has been practically unbearable just to see these high temperatures daily of 105 to 110 being forecast. We know that heat's going to open up. Here it comes on Friday into Saturday farther to the north. This weekend, the cooler weather here is all about where we could get that snow at very high elevation. But we're going to be talking about temperatures getting well up into the 90s, maybe cracking 100 degrees in this region. Sunday into Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. A lot of, midsummer-like warmth coming back to the midsection of the country. But as you know, by midweek next week, there's that next trough. And as it kind of sneaks into this area, it's going to be the one that, around the 29th, 30th, 1st, we will then start to see, the cooler risks coming back into the Great Lakes. And I showed you the European at the beginning. Here's the GFS. The new day 5 through 10 shows that cooler air. The day 10 through 15 brings it right here over the Great Lakes while the warmth comes back to the west, just like we talked about at the beginning. So to kind of think more about that temperature forecast, I'm going to show you the CFSV2. This is their first, this is the 5th of September through the 11th. That's the 12th through the 18th. And I just look at this and say, I start to see more warmth being forecast farther to the west, which could at times indicate cooler weather coming through this area. At this point, I still don't have any sort of concrete evidence that you're looking at a frost event, but I just want you to be aware that that seems to be where the models are kind of taking and leaving the heat. On the other side of this, let's go look at the European. Now, in the European, remember I kept complaining that it kept putting too high pressure here? We're now seeing this a little bit better, that it's splitting it back up again. So the pressure around the Pacific high is kind of being broken up into a couple of different places. So I like that. That makes more sense to me now. So on the temperature side of it, if we come back to the United States view and say, show me the next 30 days, the model's still very, very biased warm. I don't know. I would say this whole region and at times up, into the western side of Canada, yes. But I think the temperature pattern is going to fluctuate more than this, which also has me calling into question their precipitation forecast. But the only thing I'm really concerned about here is what's going to be happening down in, down here in the Gulf of Mexico going forward, with the potential for either taking a tropical system that came out of the Atlantic or kind of our own homebrew one building and running into the south. So I need you to look at this forecast for the month of September and just take it with a grain of salt on the precipitation pattern. I don't buy into it fully. And one of the reasons for that is what I'm watching is this. When you look at this Hofmüller diagram, which goes back to August 2nd all the way to September 1st, so the forecast date today is here. Do you see this large area of blue? This has been the rebuilding of some stronger easterly winds, which is what we have to have in order to get La Nina to show up. We've seen the Southern Oscillation Index bounce back up. And as you look at this color represents where the Southern Oscillation Index is more El Nino-like, and this is what it would have to be La Nina-like. And again, what is a Southern Oscillation Index? We're just measuring the winds essentially between Tahiti and Darwin, and we do that via pressure. So it's a pressure index, but the pressure difference tells us the wind. So this bump up tells me that we're getting back toward, a true, build up toward a La Nina. But I'm not convinced that this La Nina is going to come in full force. I just don't think it's going to be there by fall, meaning you need to watch these other pieces of the flow we keep highlighting to determine if we do have, major fluctuations coming in the temperature and in the pressure. All right. But what this will influence as it does come in later on this fall will be the spring weather down in South America. And as we've talked about, we know that it's quite cold in Argentina right now and hot in Brazil. And that's why over the next 10 days, along that front, some heavy rain will be down here in Paraguay, Uruguay, southern Brazil, all the way from like maybe Mato Grosso do Sul, but down into Sao Paulo, Rio Grande do Sul, Paraná, and then down into Argentina. But no early indication of the monsoon setting up just yet farther to the north. And I do need you to see this, though. The 30-day outlooks from the European model, which I've been telling you have been very biased to the current precipitation pattern, which they just came off of one of their driest dry seasons. Just watch this with me. The current 30-day forecast, the sliding day window, starts to shift toward wetter conditions as you enter the month of October. So September 6th to October 6th, the new European update is attempting to return monsoonal rains to this area. And if that is the case, there will be rapid and early planting in September. That is something we've got to watch. Confidence in this is still pretty low because I have yet to see the winds coming around the subtropical high, which sits here. They're right now going like this. They have to come around like that. But if that occurs, this area could go over wetter, and I think it's one of the top things we've got to be watching with respect to the start of another growing season in South America. So I'll leave it at that. Tell you I'll keep watching it. We'll report back to you again tomorrow morning. Until then, have a good one. Thanks.